So I've had an idea for years to make a side-scrolling movie. What I didn't have was necessarily the money or the technology to pull it off, so I knew very early on that I was going to have to build that from the ground up and figure out how the hell are we going to make this movie inside of a studio apartment. Typical day on set of Waves of Madness involves me walking up to the apartment upstairs, Unit 14, where we knew was free for the duration of our shoot, so we were going to rent that out and we were going to shoot a movie in there. Here's my director of photography, Marcus Menser, who was also staying in the studio apartment because we like to save budget around here. Every day I'd have to re-age my vest in the movie because it started out as this brand new clean black thing that looked, pretty shit for lack of a better word. And in order in the black and white, especially to make it appear out of the shadows, I would take a piece of chalk and I would rub it down and make it look like it's been, LaGrasse has been using this thing for years and years and years. But the thing with chalk is you smudge it and it comes off and you have to reapply it, every day or so. Here we have our 3-person crew hard at work prepping the day. We've got scripts, we've got makeup, we've got craft service, batteries, etc. And this gives you quite a good look at the space. It's just a little room, it's tiny. When I was making all of the sets in pre-production, I had to figure out how big the actual sets were because I started building things almost like tiles, and I measured it out with a person and realized it's about 15 feet that each one of the sets I was building was. So we measured this out, and I had 15 feet in the studio apartment that was all greened off. This was just a way I could wrap my brain around it so that each set was its own take, its own scene. So that's how we shot the movie, is 15 feet at a time in this small room. Which, as you can see, we were really pushing it to the limits with a wide-angle lens of being able to see the 15 feet in the studio apartment. The camera was backed all the way up against the wall, and that's why we have this monitor here so we can even see what we're doing. We got our green tiles there from some toy store for children because they have these little soft green play tiles. And we're like, I have no idea why you need to use that except for this. On FP3 and 4, we ran into a lot of trouble because we painted a whole room green, which is really funny at the time. But every day, like in the morning and night, you have to touch up the floor because it keeps getting scuffed up. And the great things with these pads is they're meant for little kids to run and rip the shit out of them and them to pretty much retain their form. So they're lasted the duration of the shoot, which was great. And look, I'm sure this whole green screen setup looks a bit jank to your average professional VFX guy, but I can attest that everything keyed out just fine, and it's really all you need to make a movie. You probably even need less. So I knew when prepping this movie that I didn't want to use real guns because there's really no need anymore. When you have all these directors who think they're cowboys who live in their $5 million mansions and, the Hollywood Hills, and they'll swear to you can tell the difference between a real muzzle flash and a fake one, real guns and fake guns. The reality is, you just can't. Most movies use them. It's so much safer and easier this way. There's no way to do it any other way. Adding in muzzle flashes and shells flying out the end of the gun is the most basic VFX shot you can do. Super fast, super easy, super safe, super cheap. But also, TLDR, we shot this movie in Australia where guns are pretty much illegal, so this was really our only option, but I wouldn't do it any other way. I mean, it really feels like you're playing around. Everyone's safe, you can have fun. I mean, it just feels like you're playing around with your buddies in school, and that's really what this is all about, right? Having fun and entertaining people. So at this point, we've shot the movie at a studio apartment. We have everything we need, except for a cruise ship and backgrounds for a little guy on the green screen walking around, making this movie make sense. So this is where things got interesting. For this movie, I didn't want to have a bunch of CGI backgrounds, so my idea was I'm going to go around where I live in Sydney and just take a bunch of pictures of little pieces that I think I could use to slowly construct Photoshop in the backgrounds to bring this cruise ship that I obviously don't have the budget to produce to life on the computer. Here, I'd start with the deep background with pictures like inside of storefronts. I'd find a doorway that I like and I'd put that together. I grew up on the Resident Evil novelizations when I was a kid, so S.T. Perry's sounds like the name for this shop. I'm going to find some storefront pieces, throw some glass in between those, fog that up, make that kind of seem like it's real. Go out, take some pictures of these trash cans and benches, populate that with the background. get the cruise ship advertisement video together that I use for one of the crowdfunding perks on the Indiegogo, throw that in the background. Then we're going to start throwing in some light and some smoke layers and attempt to soften this up and make it, look less fake and hopefully more real. And we keep chipping away at that more and more and more, and I find some railing and those pillars that I took a picture of. I chop those out, put that in the foreground so we have some depth, and we put on our final fog layer here. Then we make sure we have the scale right. We throw me in there as a little guy that we shot in the studio apartment. Then we turn it black and white, and we start putting on finishing filters and layers and just try to dumb down the 8K and soften this up and make it like an old classic 1930s, 40s Universal monster movie. So at this point, we built all the sets. Everything's looking cool. We've got this moody-looking, side-scrolling cruise ship that I'm very happy with. But there's this opener of the movie where it's the cruise ship before everyone disappears, and obviously there's about one of me, so, how the hell am I going to populate this thing? I knew we didn't have the budget for extras, so what we did have is a lot of friends and family in Sydney, so on the last day of shooting, we decided we'll just throw a party in the studio apartment where we've been shooting the whole movie and give people a bunch of drinks and have them up there and just have them wander around, stand there, sit there, all these different ways on a cruise ship, and I can flop them around, multiply them, insert them wherever I want in the background of the movie, and make it feel like this ship's a lot more populated than it is with the same 10 people walking around back and forth. Michael Lee actually made cruise ship t-shirts for all the extras and sent them over to us in Australia that actually have the Elder of the Seas logo on them, which were fun, and all their lanyards also are Elder of the Seas and have their name on it, which was quite a fun little detail you'll never see. And this is what it looks like when everyone that we shot in the studio apartment is inserted into the background of the cruise ship, and it looks a lot more populated than it was. Now, if anyone needs a master class on how to walk like a normal, average, inconspicuous human being, please watch Talei's mom show you all how it's done.
That's so good, Narelle. That's so incredible.
So I really wanted my character's introduction to be in this cool little boat that would then drive into the cruise ship and show you the scale of everything and kind of show you how the movie moved, which was great until I started to kind of realize, where the hell am I going to find a boat to shoot on? So obviously, Michael Lee, being the international man of magic and mystery that he is, he's like, oh, you want a boat? I got 2 boats. So he chose one of his boats, and he drove it over. The original plan was, we'll drive this thing into your driveway. Turns out it didn't fit. So we're like, park it on the sidewalk, and we'll, shoot from the driveway. That seems safe enough, right? So Michael Lee and his son Kenji start setting up the boat for us, and then we start kind of wrapping our brain around how are we going to shoot this boat, and how are we going to attach green screen on it, and there's wind, and etc. I knew we wanted to shoot it outside because lighting this boat would be a pain in the ass, the limited lighting we have. So we just started pulling out all the green screen and bits of whatever that we had and C-stands and started just taping and clamping the hell out of it until we covered enough of it up to where Talei and I could go up there and do scenes and we'd mostly disappear. Luckily, I knew we weren't going to have to cover up the entire thing because I was going to build a more tactical-looking boat off of pictures I've been taking around Sydney of different boats to kind of soup it up and make it look a lot more militaristic. Luckily, we had cloud cover, so the sun wasn't too out of control, and then we started lining everything up, getting the camera out and seeing how we were going to do this. And again, luckily, we're shooting in 8K and everything's going to be a one-shot, which meant once we had everything perfect, we were pretty much good to go and we never had to change the camera. We could just run up there and shoot it as quickly as possible, assuming I knew my lines, which, I tend to, but I'll surprise you. And that's always when Talei comes out and is the script supervisor, and she voices my commander from the radio, and then we just go for it and we start shooting the scene. And in the background, you can see the garage we shot our Los Angeles unit back at the new and improved Michael Lee Studios 2.0. Which has had a rebuild since FP 3 and 4 when the house was demolished. Finally, after a lot of building and testing and what have you, we're ready to shoot the scenes, and we get to work. Now at this point, great, we've shot the scene, but how do we make it look like a movie? How do I insert all of this into our black and white cruise ship? Now, in order to bring this to life, I'm gonna have to build the real boat on top of this one. It was important to have something physical for me to operate because operating a boat without a real boat there was going to be a nightmare. So We cut me out. We get the little scene. Then I take all these pictures I found around Sydney of real boats, and then I put them together in a more tactical-looking boat, slowly by slowly, putting some comm equipment on the roof, making sure all this kind of makes sense. Then I got to key out the background here and make sure everything's greened out so I can key this all out and put it onto an ocean layer. Now, where am I going to find the ocean? Luckily, I went on a trip to Tasmania, and for the 6 months leading up to this movie, every time I was on a boat, which is quite a bit in Australia it seems, I would just take video footage from my phone of the water moving, knowing I was going to need this for the set in particular. Now I take all of the elements and start putting them together for the final scene. We've got the ocean, we've got the boat, we've got the tactical boat I've made, our black and white filter, our After Effects, everything that we need to make this look like the rest of the movie. And for something we shot in a Sidewalk, I'm honestly pretty impressed with it. It was really important to me that in the finale there would be this big action chase sequence to get off the boat. But I knew when writing it that, just walking or running off wasn't going to be enough because we've already done that for an hour and whatever. So I wanted there to be some sort of vehicular, almost Metal Slug-like side-scrolling action sequence to get out of this. And that's when this sequence came about, which was definitely a noodle scratcher. So when thinking about what sort of car we were going to do this car chase with, I had to think about some logistics such as, what's your token, cheesy car that you'd find for you could spin to win on a cruise ship, but also what would fit in a cruise ship, and then lastly and most importantly, what could we actually fit inside of Michael Lee's garage to shoot? So we had to do some measuring and see which cars would actually fit in there this way, and so we came up with the Mini. And here is Michael Lee and our DP Marcus proving that you can just fit this Mini in the garage, which was great for us, but there was a second there where we're like, I don't know, is this gonna work? And then it worked, so that's how movies are made. Now we start rigging everything up and clearing out the garage and getting ready for this shoot. We have our 15 feet blocked out for what is gonna be in frame, and then we start kind of plotting it out and seeing what's gonna happen here. A lot has to go on because, yes, this is like a 2-minute sequence with the scene of us jumping in and getting in the car and driving off, but we kind of all have to do it in one. So it was a lot of fun figuring out how to do this and jumping over a Mini, shooting with a Mini, Talay driving a Mini, which we actually had to boost her up because Minis ride quite low, so in order to get her in frame, we had to pad that seat up, which you see us trying to work on here. I'd say out of all the scenes we shot in the movie, this was probably the most fun, getting to do a fake car chase while avoiding this giant monster and shooting a toy AK-47, and it was just a lot of fun here. And we had a fan blowing to try to get some wind on us to make it look as real as possible, and we just shot a bunch of takes, and the old-fashioned, I think that's gonna work, and Marcus will tell us if it's in focus, if we're lit, and then generally we move on. The key with all this is just to truly believe that you're there, and I think we did. Now here we are again, we have one of those moments where we shot this car chase in a garage, but how am I gonna sort of bring this to life? So I had to start getting all the panels that I made for the entire cruise ship and start lining them together and rolling them by in the background like, you'd see in a Looney Tunes cartoon or a side-scrolling video game. And then figure out, so I'm gonna use that as my background, so that, and finding the speed of which this car is gonna go, and then realizing we only have so much room on this cruise ship before we're gonna have to bail out for logistical reasons.
Yeah, roll it. Marker. Ready?
Yeah.
Set, and action!
Now that we've got our background figured out, I'm going to take the scene that we shot and start slowly cutting it out from the rest of the room and then putting it to life here in the wide shot, which looks a bit silly, but then when you start adding your actual movie with the grain layers and zooming in and out, the scene really starts to come to life, and it was a lot of fun to put together.
That was good. Cool. That was great. Right, got it. Check it out.
Then this led us to the aftermath of the car exploding, which I was like, all right, well, Minis are easy enough toys to find on Amazon, so I'll get a couple of those and light those on fire out in Michael Lee's driveway, and we get to do some more miniature work, which I always love. Found some sort of creepy monster skeleton, lit that on fire to throw on top of the Mini. I knew the shot was going to be quick and we're running right by it, so it doesn't have to be too detailed or crazy, but this was just a lot of fun to do, so we did it, because whenever you can light anything on fire, that's fun, right? And now here's the final result of putting a little miniature mini and a giant monster on top of it. When conceptualizing this movie, I knew that I wanted to have some very unique monsters that I hadn't seen before, but I also really wanted them to be practical, which meant I wanted them to be puppeted, and since it was basically two of us on the crew at this point doing that, this was one of the biggest puzzles of the movie. So my idea with this was we don't have a whole team of puppeteers, and we don't have the money to make something that elaborate or electronic or what have you, so Michael Lee built a bunch of different monster pieces, and I figured if we shoot them one at a time, then I can kind of Photoshop them all together inside Final Cut and make this moving multi-layer creature that's all puppeted in one way or another. I knew I wanted tentacles, so the best thing I could find for little tentacles was this little lizard whose tail just moved so well. And I was like, hey, Michael Lee, what do you think? He's like, cool. So, grabbed that, brought it back to the cabin blue screen, and put it to work. And I knew I needed some creepy hands and arms in there to be reaching out towards people. So, I painted my arm up, went in the kitchen, put the green screen out, and fit the bill for that one. Now, we've got a clean layer here of the leecher before I put some spooky smoke and fog thunderstorm thing around it to spice it up. Then we throw some arms in there, we throw a cult member in there, and then we've got ourselves a full creature with all of our layers. And I think somehow this brought my dream to life of puppeting a giant practical creature with two people. So in the script, the leechers kind of manifest out of the nightmare realm or what have you, and these arms pick you up and you become the arms of the old one to reach out and grab its prey that it needed to eat. So I was like, okay, I don't have wires, and this is a pretty elaborate thing to pick somebody up off the ground and pull them around and puppeteer them. So I was like, well, I can just get a green suit on and then just pick people up and shake them around a little bit and then add the monster on top of them. And I think it's going to work. And I think it worked out pretty well, all things considered. Now here we put some effects on top of it to kind of add our V1 leecher monster over Meg getting picked up and tossed around. Then once I have all of this made on the computer, then I can pull it into the scene and add it in with the Russian mercenaries here. And then we go ahead and bring this scene to life with the Meg leecher, which is our first exposure to it. So I wanted this to be a little bit darker and spookier with how it works and not quite have the pincer crab arms that come in later with the V2 with all the slime on them. The thing I did like about picking people up and, shaking them around, dying with them, picking them up, getting sucked up by monsters and all these things, is you can really control and puppeteer people so much better when it's you picking them up. Yeah, sure, it's physically quite demanding, but I've done enough wire work on my day to know that can kind of get haywire pretty fast, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of rigs. And this, this did the job. I'm very happy with the end product, and, it maintained our number one rule, which is have fun and be safe. I knew that with the old one, I wanted to have a big finale, big giant final boss room scene. And that was going to be a challenge, obviously, because we didn't have either the budget or the space to build something of the size necessary, so obviously that led us to miniatures. So for the finale of this movie, I wanted to reveal that the old one was eating all of the cruise ship members to grow itself into existence. So in order to build something like that, we got our blue screen ready. Michael Lee built these awesome monster hands, and we microwaved a bunch of kid slime and poured it all over them, and then he started puppeteering them, and piece by piece, we started building this ancient underwater god in a small cabin in Big Bear. And I realized if we're doing an old one, we need to have a bunch of tentacles, so Michael Lee did what he does, and he made a bunch of cool tentacles, and we flopped those around the garage. And then that led us to the actual old one skull itself, because the idea is it's growing, so it's coming out of its skull and growing its skin onto itself with every next passenger it eats. And this was a lot of fun to puppeteer. Michael Lee put a bunch of fishing line on the individual tentacles, and then him and I puppeted that while I poured oozing hot slime onto it to make it look like it was growing skin. And then we shot all of this in slow motion so that everything could look bigger and crazier. And then once we had all of our layers shot, we started putting everything together. We put the head, the hands, and which looks silly at first, and then we make some glowing eyes, and then figure out the scale of the old one's head. And then for our final layer, we'll need the cult leaders summoning the old one.
Set. Action.
欢呀呀嘛，听听空听懂我们的背，哇，这个对，爸爸说对，看我啦啦啦，真的娃娃。
And now that I have all my layers in place, I can start comping everything in and trying to blend it all together and make it look like something. I take the final composition and I put all of our final layers and lighting onto it, and then we have a giant old one and a finale scene. Making a low-budget movie, it's just that easy.